You remember that song, David?
I do remember. That's Men at Work, I think. It's a Mistake.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Chris. That was a good intro song. It's a Mistake from Men at Work. Hello and welcome to GroupOne's third webinar of this year. I'm David Graves, GroupOne Sales Representative. And with me today is Chris Wilson, our Marketing and Communications Director. Chris, thanks for being with us today. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thank you, David. I'm glad to be here. I love your webinars, and I appreciate you letting me work with you today.
Awesome. It's good to have you here to kind of co-pilot here with me today. Chris is going to be helping turn the slides with me today, and he will jump in anytime he wants to jump in. So thanks again, Chris. Today we have a very exciting presentation planned for our audience today. We are going to be talking about some of the mistakes HR leaders can make when it comes to background screening. You know, Chris, before coming to GroupOne 5 years ago, I was an HR professional, and I spent time ordering and reviewing background screening reports when hiring many people for the organizations I work for. And believe me, I learned a lot about background screening then, and I'm still learning even more now that I'm on the other side of the counter, so to speak, working for a background screening company. I made mistakes then, and I learned the hard way, and now I'd like to share some of those experiences with our audience and save them some of the mistakes I made. So, Chris, I think we'll get started here, but I think you had something to share with our audience. I think you've got some legal disclaimers.
Yeah, and I want to let everyone know if you had questions, type them into the question box, and we will get to those towards the end of the presentation. We want to remind our listeners of our legal disclaimer. I do want to preface this webinar by saying we are not attorneys. David, you're not an attorney, right?
No, I'm not even studying to be an attorney.
The information and opinions expressed are for educational purposes only and are based on current practice, industry-related knowledge, and business expertise. Here we go. The information shall not be construed as legal advice, express or implied. You should always consult your legal counsel when it comes to background screening compliance issues.
All right. Thank you for sharing that. And of course, we do hope that the information that we provide today will be helpful to you in your hiring process and give you better insights into what it takes in building a strong background screening program for your company. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with our presentation. Of course, there are many mistakes that you can make when it comes to background screening from an HR standpoint, but one of the first mistakes that you can make is not having a written plan and policy in place. That's one of the biggest risks, is just not knowing or being prepared ahead of time to know exactly why you're running background screening in the first place. You need to really know what type of background checks you need for each specific position. One size doesn't always fit when it comes to background screening. Sometimes you need to tailor your background search.
I think tailor's the word there, David, with that photograph.
Tailor is definitely I noticed you did a great job with the photographs there. They definitely need to be tailored and resized so that they have the proper fitting. And that's exactly when it comes to background screening, you have different positions inside a company. You may have a cash handling position, which might necessitate you running an employment credit history report for those positions. Or maybe you have somebody that drives for your company, and you may need to check their driving record to make sure that they have a good driving history. For our healthcare and our social workers, it might be important, if they're working with patients, to obviously run a sex offender registry, and for our healthcare workers, maybe sanction and exclusion checks for those type of jobs. But and if you have line level office staff, you may want to run criminal checks for them. However, maybe for the upper management positions, you may want to verify education or professional licenses that they may have. But the point is if by having a written policy in place, you'll help yourself and your staff know exactly what you want to do as far as background checks for your various positions at the front end. Also, know what your policy is concerning misdemeanors and felonies. Ask yourselves and your staff, can you hire someone with a past criminal record? And if so, what are the conditions you make as exceptions when it comes to hiring someone that may have a criminal record? Do you consider things such as how long it was, how long ago did they commit the crime, what type of criminal offense would be acceptable in hiring? And knowing those policies ahead of time can make the hiring process so much easier. It may be something I was kind of joking with Chris earlier when we were starting to get ready for this, is that, you know, it might be one thing if I was going to hire Chris if I knew that 7 years ago he had shoplifted a pack of chewing gum versus if he had knocked over a liquor store 7 years ago and killed a person.
Yeah.
That would make a huge difference in whether or not I was going to hire that person.
Absolutely.
So knowing your policies ahead of time and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, how long ago the crime was committed versus, you know, if it was just committed 3 months ago or 6 months ago, maybe if it happened 7 years ago, might make a big difference. Also, after you come out of an interview with a person, you're probably going to get a better feel to know more about that person and if it would be okay to hire them if they had a criminal record. Also, be relevant with your background screening. Know how much education and employment history you may need to verify before ordering background checks. I mean, do you really need 7 years of employment history, or do you need to verify the person's current and maybe just their previous 1 or 2 employments? For some positions, you may not need an employment history at all. Education might not even be needed for some positions, but at the end of the day, making sure you have relevant employment and education history that matches the needs of the job is what's most important. Also, be consistent with your background checks. If you check employment history for certain positions, do you also check employment history and education background for that same position? If you drug screen one employee for hire, then all employees should be drug screened. The point is just to be consistent when you're doing your background screening or your screening policies. But knowing ahead of time and working with a written plan and policy in place will save you lots of time and lots of mistakes and avoid spending more time and energy and money when ordering background checks. Mistake number 2. Not enough or too much information obtained.
David, is that you? Are you that professor there?
That professor doesn't look like me. However, that professor might look like me maybe in 20 or 30 years, but I hope at least I have a smile on my face. He looks a little mean and a little angry. Another mistake that HR recruiters make is not obtaining enough information at the beginning of the screening process. This happens at the beginning of the application process of gathering information, when your recruiters don't review the information provided by the candidate at the time of application or when they provide their resume. Many candidates, as you know, I'm sure we have lots of recruiters and talent acquisition people listening right now. A lot of times applicants leave a lot of information blank. They leave a lot of fields left open or blank. They NA things or mark them does not apply. They leave gaps on their resume that were not questioned in the interview process of why there's a 6-month or a year gap between jobs. But all these omissions will always mean delays on the back end and create longer turnaround times when we leave these things blank in a background check. And by the way, GroupOne does have a feature called Quick Invite that allows you to send an email background screening link to the candidates. The candidates then complete the required information such as their name, address, social security number, date of birth, their employment, education information, and any other information needed for that background check. However, the candidates can still enter an NA or remove employment history, but the GroupOne system is flexible enough that we can make adjustments to your account to prevent this from happening. For example, we could and can and do this sometimes with some of our clients when we run into these troubles, where we'll add instructions to educate the candidates about what's expected in those needed fields, like instructing them to enter maybe 7 years of employment history, or telling them or making sure they know or reminding them, please do not enter NA, please complete each field. We are looking for 7 years of employment history. Please include all relevant employment history for 7 years. And then we'll instruct them how to do that. So that's when you're not getting enough information. The other mistake on the other side of that is obtaining too much information, which can be just as much of a mistake. For example, going beyond the screening scope and checking for information on a candidate via social media channels. Now, GroupOne has stayed out of the social media lanes for many reasons, mainly because it creates exposure to your company and also GroupOne for EEOC type legal action. By looking at a candidate's social media pages like Facebook or Twitter, I guess that's now called X, right? I'm not sure if you call it Twitter or X these days.
I still get confused by that.
I know, I am too. But when you go and you're in the middle of a hiring process and you have not made somebody an offer of employment, and you go out to look on their social media pages, it's going to reveal to you such things as the candidate's race, their color, their religion, their age, national origin, disability status, maybe their sexual preferences or gender identity, and many other social information about their profile that could get you into trouble. For example, if they decide that they don't get offered the position by you and don't get hired, they may decide or think that you went out to look at their social media pages and that's the reason you didn't hire them, which would give them ammunition to go to an attorney and say, look, they didn't hire me because I was this color, or I had this certain sexual preference, or national origin, any of those categories. So it never is a good idea to look at those things.
Yeah, it sounds very risky.
It is very risky. You may also find out there websites or news articles that discuss a candidate's arrest record for a crime. That arrest record, whether it's factual or not, should not be a part of your background hiring information until it's become a factual conviction through a county court criminal system. Otherwise, if you choose not to hire a candidate based on information that you saw out there on a news article, they could hold you accountable for preventing them from being hired based on false or unconfirmed information, and possibly file legal action against your company. So it's better to let the professionals handle the background screening to confirm the records. By the way, we confirm all of those records at a county court level so that we're getting it from the source of where those court records come from. When you take it from a newspaper article or off of a TV news report or something like that, you always stand the risk of learning about an arrest. But in our country, people are innocent until proven guilty. They have to go through the whole legal process to go through a court. And so you always want to use that information, not what you see on a social media or a news outlet. You may say, but I Googled it. You can Google it, you say. But I did a Google search and I found out that the candidate has a previous charge, but my background company didn't report it. And employers and background screeners, at the end of the day, you must remember that they have to adhere to the FCRA when conducting employment background checks. The FCRA has certain restrictions on what is reportable and what's not reportable on an employment background check, and only criminal cases that have resulted in a conviction are reportable within the last 7 years. Therefore, if a candidate is arrested and not convicted, or maybe the case was dismissed, the information is not reportable on a background check. And if a conviction was received, but the candidate went through the court-appointed process to expunge their records or remove that charge, then it should not be counted against them, and it really shouldn't be reported on a background check. So I think here the main thing is that balance really is the key. to having a success on knowing, how much to report or how much not to report. Just make sure you get enough information from your candidates to do due diligence in vetting them for the position. But make sure you don't make the mistake of going just too far and getting out of bounds to obtain too much information that could put your company in legal jeopardy when it comes to hiring new staff. All right, mistake number 3, cutting corners to save money. Now, everybody wants to save money, right? But in background screening, you could make the grave mistake that could be very disastrous. Some companies try to save money by having the background screening company provide them with a national criminal, or what we call a multi-jurisdictional criminal search only. Now, let me tell you that we do these searches. We have a multi-jurisdictional or national criminal search that we use, and look, they're great searches, and we encourage those to be. In fact, we run them in just about every single background check that we do. However, we don't run that background check by itself alone. We run that background check in conjunction with a county criminal search as well. Now, let me tell you a little bit about the multi-jurisdictional search if you're just curious, because we're probably running it. Some of our clients are on the phone now. We run that multi-jurisdictional search, and it covers about 1,500 sources of different search databases. It covers the sex offender registries in all 50 states and territories. It also checks sanction and exclusions for especially our healthcare clients like the OIG, the OFAC, the SAM.gov, the FDA, to name a few. It also checks any available state databases that are available. And then, like I said, 1,500 sources that's in that. If you're ever curious about what those sources are, you can send me an email, let me know. I'd be happy to send you a source list for that. Also at GroupOne, we have a feature called Add to Crim. Add is abbreviated for address to criminal. And basically what that feature does is it takes that candidate's social security number, and then based on social security headers, I think they call them, inside the social security number, it will take and add all the address history where they've lived over the past 7 years, and then we will automatically add those counties to the criminal searches. And so we'll search each of those counties. And if we get a name match, or what we call a hit, we get a name match in one of those counties, our researchers will then do their due diligence to research that court of the county record to see if that is the same person that you're trying to hire across the desk from you. Now, that catches any of the criminal charges that might have been in where somebody lived. However, what if they committed a crime outside of where they lived? That's why we run that multi-jurisdictional search, or the national criminal search, is to be what we often call as an extra wide net to catch anything that we might miss in the county criminal search. But you never want to just run just the national criminal search. And there are background screening companies that'll say, look, we'll run a background check for you for $5 or $10, something like that. And it sounds like it's a great deal on the surface, but at the end of the day, if you don't have a full spectrum and a full background check on a person, you could miss that, and that could be a grave mistake by missing it. So you always want to make sure that you do a very thorough job and not cut corners by trying to save $1 or $2, because at the end of the day, if somebody gets injured or hurt in your workplace because you went and hired somebody, and then somebody was injured, somebody was killed, God forbid that were to happen, but somebody got killed, and then they went back, and the family that decides to sue your company because you missed something on a background check claiming that you were negligent, they would finally discover that when you ran the background checks, you kind of cut a corner and didn't do a thorough check, and then obviously that would put you in some legal jeopardy. All right. Mistake number 4,
here we go,
is cherry picking your searches. Now, sometimes recruiters will order items searched a la carte only. Now, this can be a mistake, and it's not necessarily a bad thing to do that. We do offer a la carte searches at GroupOne, and we do make those available. But where it can be a mistake is when a customer might, instead of using a package, and by the way, we have different kinds of packages. We have an essential criminal package that kind of checks just the criminal aspects, maybe for those line type of positions. But then we also offer other kind of professional or career packages, healthcare professional packages. Those packages will check all the employment or education, maybe professional licenses that the person may have. But the packages are set up to provide you with a discount inside of that package when you bundle other searches inside of that package. So the biggest mistake by ordering a la carte is one, you're going to cost your company more money by not taking advantage of the discount pricing that you get by using a package. The other mistake that you can make when it comes to ordering a la carte, a lot of times recruiters will say, okay, well, we're going to add the counties where that person lived based on what I see on their application. So I look on their application, I see they lived in Dallas, I see they lived in Houston, so I add Harris County, Houston, and I add Dallas County, but they're just kind of guessing at what and where the person lived. They might have missed that they also lived in Alabama for a little bit, and they also lived in Georgia for a little bit, but they didn't get any of those states or those counties. So just by guessing, I mentioned a feature a while ago, Chris, is the add to crim, and that address to crim feature that runs in your package. When you run a package with GroupOne, it will look out over that 7 years and determine where that person lived based on the credit headers on their Social Security number search, and will automatically add each of those counties, making it to where it's not necessary to add a la carte counties in there. However, you may be told by a candidate that they were a travel nurse in Seattle or Portland or something like that, and that county's not going to show up. So we do make a la carte counties available so that you can add counties as needed, but it can be a mistake if you're only adding the counties based on where you think they lived. You might miss someplace where they actually did live, and therefore we wouldn't run a criminal search on them in those places. So I would caution our listeners not to just cherry pick, what you're going to put and what you're going to add. Mistake number 5, not obtaining proper authorization when it comes to background checks. Not getting a copy of the authorization to verify employment, education, criminal verifications can cause delays, number 1, and delays are a mistake you can't afford when it comes to hiring personnel. Authorization forms are used to provide the candidate disclosure that you're doing a background check on them, and it's also used to get their consent to actually conduct a background check on them. Sometimes these are also called applicant disclosures or applicant consent forms, but they are the permissions a candidate signs authorizing a background screener to perform a background check on them. Those authorization forms are the responsibility of the human resources team to obtain. GroupOne does make the process easier when using the applicant quick invite or the applicant portals by automating the process to present the candidate with an opportunity to read, review, and sign the forms. However, if you, as the HR representative, prefers to enter the candidate's information using the online ordering, the system will ask you if you've obtained a signed authorization form from the candidate. Again, this is your responsibility as the HR department. Don't rely on the background screening company to get that authorization. But if you do it on the online ordering, you will have to get a pen to or ink to paper authorization. We do provide those authorization forms if you want to use them in our forms and documents area, where you can download that and you can use that on your own letterhead to get an authorization form. But like I said, if you use the quick invite or the applicant portals, there is a tool there that's going to ask and prompt the candidate to agree and consent to a background check. They'll sign that release, and then the background check will start. But always make sure that you get that proper authorization. And by the way, according to the FCRA, to perform a background check on a person, they must consent to having a background check run on them, and failing to obtain an authorization and running a background check is illegal and could expose your company to legal damages. So that's why it's important to make sure that you're getting those authorizations. Somebody also might say, well, hey, and I do hear this from clients from time to time, David, we have a statement on our application. Is that sufficient to get the authorization to do a background check? And my answer to them is no. Really, it should be two separate documents. It's one thing to have the application, but the candidate may confuse that they're authorizing you to take their application. It really should be a separate document to get the consent and the authorization to do a background check. Number 6, jumping the gun. Running background checks too early can be a mistake. Make sure that your background checks are not run prior to making an offer of employment. Background checks should be performed post-offer of employment. And why is that? A background check will require the candidate to provide information about themselves, such as their date of birth, so now you're going to know their age, where they went to school, where they worked, etc. So some of that type of information, like we talked about before, reveals certain profile information about the person that if we use that information prior to making an employment offer and choose not to hire that candidate, candidate could make a legal claim that you chose not to hire them based on that information. So to avoid making the mistake, you should always run the background checks post-offer. Also, once a background check has started, don't make the mistake of jumping the gun to decide to move forward on a candidate when you haven't received all of the information back. In GroupOne's system, if you click on the PDF view of the report, you'll notice that it will give you a report from the very beginning, whether that report is completed or not. So you wouldn't want to, and it'll tell you that it's in progress, this search is in progress, this employment verification is in progress, etc. So you could make the mistake thinking, oh, well, the report's there and I can click on it. I guess that report's ready to go. Well, you always want to make sure that you watch that progress bar, that it completes 100% all the way across, and not use that background screening report until it is 100% complete before using it. Otherwise, you may go ahead and make the offer, go ahead and hire them, and then find out that a county finally came back a day or two later after you made them the offer of employment and you found out that they robbed a bank. That might make a difference in whether or not you're going to move forward.
That'd be a big difference.
Big difference, especially if it's a bank, right?
All right.
So that information, so always make sure that you let the report finish completely before making the decision to move forward. Now you can decide to move forward, and we do have clients do this if you're just waiting on one employment verification to come back and it's not really as relevant. You could probably extend to them the offer if that employment not going to make a difference one way or the other. You could still move forward with that background report if you choose to. But when it comes to criminal history, I probably would be prudent and err on the side of waiting for that before I'd make a decision. All right, mistake number 7, handling adverse information incorrectly. There are many advantages that screening job candidates provides for employers. Being able to look beyond the resume and interview to an applicant's past behaviors is helpful in determining the person's qualifications for a position. Background checks also protect the workplace from negligent hiring claims and its employees from dangerous new hires. But it's important that HR professionals and others involved in hiring understand that there are compliance requirements for using background screening information to help make hiring decisions. One of the most crucial and most misunderstood is the adverse action requirement. If you decide not to hire a person because of a background check or because of background check information provided by your background screening company, it is your responsibility to handle that information correctly to avoid making mistakes. And you must follow the adverse action procedures laid out by the FCRA. And so here's a few do's and don'ts for handling adverse action information on a background screening report. Number one, make sure to follow your state-specific laws. Some state laws have differing laws to follow when it comes to handling of adverse action. So make sure you know and are familiar with your state's laws, especially those of you in California, New York, I think also Colorado, Michigan. Some of those states and even more are getting added to that list that have stricter laws and rules. And number two, if you're considering an adverse action of not hiring an individual, do send them pre-adverse and adverse action letters. Now, inside the GroupOne system, we do provide you with a tool to use for that will, if you click on that, will generate letters that will pre-populate the candidate's name and address information, and it will also provide them with their rights under the FCRA. It will also advise them of how they can dispute the process should they want to do that. So you can use those letters. Now, we do not mail out those letters for you. Those are your responsibility, but we did provide you with a tool so you can download those letters. And I always advise people to make sure when you do mail those out to use the little green cards that the post office gives you when you send them out, certified mail. That way you're getting a signature back from them, which confirms that you got their acknowledgement that they received that pre-adverse and that adverse action letter. Number three, provide your candidate with a copy of their report. That way they have a copy and they can see exactly why it is and what it is that they need to contest. Because, you know, at the end of the day, they may have a legitimate right to dispute the whole process. And so they may have their name and their social security number may be confused with somebody else's name and social security number, and they've got a record that keeps popping up that keeps them from getting a job. Well, you want them to be able to have a copy of that report, and you want them to be able to dispute that information so that they can get it corrected, so that it doesn't keep them and handicap them from getting a job someplace. Number four, provide your candidate with their FCRA rights. Now, when you send that pre-adverse letter that we provide you inside the GroupOne system, it also, when you print that out, it's also going to print out the FCRA rules and rights that they have under the FCRA. And also, number five, give them and show them how to dispute the information. And we're also providing that with that adverse and pre-adverse letters, the whole dispute process. And by the way, that dispute is with GroupOne, and so it will have our information on there and how to contact us and how to start that whole process. All right, let's move on from that to mistake number 8. Let me take a look at the time and see how we're doing. It's 1:33.
Okay.
Taking a sip of coffee. Been talking here for a while. All right, number 8. Pitfalls to hiring temporary or contract workers. When hiring candidates who have previously been temporary or contract workers, make sure to enter where they worked. Don't make the mistake of having the candidate enter or you enter the wrong information from the get-go. And we see this happen often where, for example, if your candidate worked at a certain hospital, they may enter on their application that they were an employee at XYZ hospital, but when we finally do the research and when we finally have to reach out and contact the candidate, because when we call the hospital, they don't have a record of that person at all, yet we call that person, they say, no, I worked there. We'll finally ask them the question, okay, where did your paycheck come from? And they'll say, well, it came from XYZ staffing company, but I worked at Methodist or Parkland Hospital. Then we go, okay. And now we have to start from the very beginning to start to get a employment verification now from XYZ staffing company because even though they worked at Parkland Hospital, they actually worked at XYZ staffing company. So the idea here is the biggest mistake is entering the wrong employer information will cause you delays in getting back the correct employment history information. So you might want to ask your candidates in the interview, were you on an assignment at this hospital, or were you a travel nurse on this assignment, or were you a W-2 employee of XYZ hospital, etc. If you encounter a lot of staffing or temporary employees, you might want to consider updating maybe even your application information to ask them these kind of questions to get clarification, because it will save you a lot of time on the back end by having good information on the front end. Also, keep in mind that GroupOne system is flexible to provide candidates messaging to advise them of your expectation of the information needed. For example, we can enter language or educate the candidates by putting language in the prompts on the screen, like, please provide employer information of who you worked for. If you work for a staffing company, please provide the name of the staffing company and not the company that you were on assignment for. By entering the right information at the beginning of the background checks will make all the difference in the world in getting your reports back in a timely fashion, and avoid that mistake of causing yourself and your company and your hiring process lots of delays. Number 9, once is not enough.
Isn't that the name of a famous novel, Once is Not Enough?
I'm not sure if I read that one. Who wrote that novel?
Probably from the 70s. I'm showing my age there. Go ahead.
Oh, well, I think I'm actually older than you. I'm not sure. But I don't remember that. But once is never enough. You need to do things more than once. And when it comes to background screening, post-employment checks are needed as well. And they're probably the one employment check that is most overlooked. And I think it's also because of that other mistake that we had of cutting corners and saving your budgets and your pricing and that type of thing. But most employers, of course, will run a background check on their employees upon hire, but most employers do not run a follow-up background check or post-employment check on their employees. And why is this important? Well, because employees sometimes, believe it or not, get into trouble with the law after they start working for your company. Some may start working for you, but 2 years later they receive a DWI conviction. Or maybe you're in the middle of hiring somebody, and while you were hiring them, they were also, you didn't know this, but they're in the middle of a court case regarding a domestic violence case, but they did not receive the conviction for the crime until about 3 or 6 months after you had hired them. And then they started working for you. Now, your initial check that you ran with them while you were hiring them, of course, it's not going to show anything at all, and it wouldn't show anything. But your post-employment check, if you checked it again 3, 6 months, or even just had an annual check once a year, would reveal that, wow, at the time I was hiring them, they were actually in the middle of a court case and they got convicted of this or that. So
it's happened before.
It has happened before, and it's one of the most overlooked, and it's really one of the most obvious type of background checks that you really need, because things do happen and people do get into trouble. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to, fire that person because they had a record, but you always want to know exactly what's going on. It might make a difference if, say, hey, that worker is a truck driver for you, or maybe is a driver for your hospital, driving patients and that thing kind of around, and now they have a DWI and they have a license that's been suspended, and they're driving your people around. That can make a huge difference, and it's obviously going to make a difference in how you handle that person. You may have to relocate them in a position. Like I say, you don't have to necessarily let them go, but you might need to relocate them into a better position based on what you've learned about their background check. Now, we have a lot of hospital clients that do post-employment checks, and they run sanction and exclusion checks on a regular basis every quarter, or annually. We even have hospitals that do annual rechecks of criminal rechecks on their employees. Now, they may not need to check employment or education. All those things really didn't change in any way, but checking criminal history can make a big difference in your hiring and retention process. All right, I think we have come to mistake Number 10. Oops, I lost a candidate again. It kind of sounds like an old Britney Spears song or something.
I think that was
like
a song. I think you're right.
Our next presentation will be on different song titles and things like that. A conviction should not always be an ender to an employment, as I just said a while ago. Background checks can be taken, of course, on a case-by-case basis. You should establish, though, a hiring process and determine what are acceptable parameters you can live with when it comes to hiring someone who might have a previous criminal record. A great example of this is a company called Cornbread Hustle. Their slogan is a staffing company for second chances, and your background doesn't need to hold you back. Cornbread Hustle is a staffing company here locally in the Dallas area that specializes in placing workers back into the workplace who have had previous criminal records.
What a great company, huh?
It is a great company. Did you know that 1 out of every 3 adult Americans has a criminal record of some sort? I thought that was amazing. That's on their website.
That's a surprise, yeah.
That being the case, chances are you will encounter a candidate with a criminal record of some sort at some point. But does that have to be an ender when it comes to hiring that individual? And of course, the answer is no, it doesn't have to be an ender. But you do need to establish your hiring policies and set the parameters so you and your hiring team know exactly what is and is not acceptable hiring practices for your company. By avoiding the hiring of all individuals with a past criminal record, you could make the big mistake of missing out on hiring a great candidate for your company who could make great contributions to your organization.
Absolutely.
And I had some examples of this that came off I think this one wasn't on Cornbread Hustle, but this was another, I Googled it, like I said earlier.
No, and I saw this. Go ahead.
And that's Dave's Killer Bread. You might be familiar with.
I saw this bread at the grocery store just the other day.
I've had this bread, and it's good. It's healthy bread, but it actually tastes good.
Yeah.
And it's healthy. It's low in sugar.
Great bread.
I'm diabetic, so I've got to watch my sugar and that kind of thing, and it's got lower sugars and that kind of thing. So, but before creating Dave's Killer Bread, Dave Dahl spent 15 years in prison. He credits his turnaround to a drafting class he took in prison. For the first time, he said, I realized I might actually be good at something worthwhile. After his release, Dahl got a minimum wage job at his family bakery, but the same year he developed what is now #1 selling organic bread in the U.S. Now retired from baking, he operates other businesses as serving as a philanthropist, supporting causes including second chance employment. At Dave's Killer Bread, he says, we didn't avoid people with criminal records. Overall, we found them to be amongst our most loyal and dedicated and trustworthy employees. Like me, they wanted a fresh start, and we gave that to them.
It's a great story.
Isn't that
awesome? Great story.
So just because somebody has a criminal record doesn't mean that it has to be an end all. It always, of course, depends on taking each case by case. It also depends on what type of position it is. You know, if it's a hospital and they're working with patients and employees, that type of thing. Certain kind of crimes, obviously, if they have a sexual offender registry record, probably not going to let them at all work with my patients just because of the danger of working there. But if they had we were talking about earlier, shoplifting from 7 years ago,
yeah,
and you lifted a pack of gum from a 7-Eleven, and that was 7 years ago, and you had a clean record since.
Stole a Slurpee, maybe.
Yeah, maybe stole a Slurpee. I can see taking that case by case and allowing somebody, not letting that hold them and prevent them from having a job. So anyway, I hope everybody has enjoyed today's presentation.
Well, great job, David.
Summary, just a little summary, and by now you may be questioning yourself, what to do, what not to do when it comes to background screening. When screening candidates for employment, a background check will, of course, be your greatest asset. But beyond first impressions, a background check provides an accurate report to make informed decisions. But make no mistake, there can be pitfalls that you need to avoid to keep from making bigger mistakes, like some of the ones that we shared today. Hopefully today's presentation has helped you by providing you with some insights on how to improve your processes and hopefully to avoid some of those mistakes. Before we conclude today's presentation, we'd like to share our contact information. I think he actually already had our contact information.
Yeah, it's up there right now.
Very good. And of course, feel free to send us an email if you would like to, any questions that you might have. Of course, we're going to go ahead and turn it over now to look at some of our audience's questions and see what we have here.
Well, we got several, but I have to ask this one first. This is from, looks like his name is Seven. It says, where can I order the bread?
Well, I believe that bread can be found in almost most of your grocery stores. I do know that Walmart has it.
I was at Kroger the other day. I saw it there as well.
Okay, so it is at Kroger. I can almost guarantee you, but I'm not sure. But Sprouts, those little healthier stores, and
they'll have it.
What's the other one?
Whole Foods.
Whole Foods probably has it for sure.
Hey, we do got a question here. How long should we consider a background check as valid? Is there an expiration date of a completed background check?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it's probably not in my compliance realm. That'd probably be a good question for our compliance director. But I do know that background history typically will go back 7 years to look back on a criminal history, and typically it's felonies typically will stay on somebody's background for forever, for a lifetime, but misdemeanors and those type of criminal history typically will drop off of a person's record after 7 years. So typically most background screeners, we look back 7 years. I don't know if that's answering their question.
That's close. I got another question here. Can we run a background check or drug screen on a candidate before we offer them a job?
That's a great question, and really my answer is no, you wouldn't want to, because you really want a background check or a drug screen to be post offer of employment. And it's for many of those reasons that I talked about earlier, is once you start to ask background screening information from a candidate, it's going to reveal a lot about them and their profile. One of the biggest ones is their date of birth, because now I know exactly how old they are. And if I haven't offered them a position, they could claim that I discriminated against them based on how old they were. So, for example, if I found out based on their age that they are 68 years old and I haven't offered them employment, yet I'm going to run a background check on them before offering them that job, I know more information about them than I really need to know about them. I'm sure there are many other reasons why you would not want to run that, but that's probably the biggest reason. You always want those to be post-employment.
Hey, we got a question here. Is GroupOne able to mail out the pre-adverse and adverse action letters on our behalf?
Yeah, currently GroupOne, and we've talked about this many a time, because we've had clients that would love for us to offer this as a service. And there are actually other background screeners out there that do offer this as a service. However, when we consult with our legal counsel, we've taken the prudent decision not to do that. And there's a lot of reasons for it. One is when it comes to pre-adverse and adverse action letters, they are time sensitive. And so when you send out the pre-adverse letter, you have 5 business days to then send out the adverse action letter. Well, number one, some of the questions that kind of come to mind is, how does the employer that decided to take the adverse action, how do they notify GroupOne of that? So now there's a time sensitivity there where we need to be communicated by the client of when to send out the letter. So there's that issue. And then once we do send out the letter, how do we keep and make sure we're on time to get out the other letters? So there's that time sensitivity. And the bigger mistake here would be to miss that and not get letters sent out that needed to be sent out. So we've kind of taken the more prudent action as, hey, look, why don't we provide our clients at least with some tools that generate the letter. They do pre-populate the candidate's name and address information, so it makes it easier for you to generate the letter. It also generates the FCRA rights for that candidate, and also generates, along with that, the whole process for filing a dispute with GroupOne for that information. So we've made the process easier by giving you a tool, but no, it's a very long answer to say no. We do not send them out on your behalf. It will probably be a conversation that we will continue to have, but at this time, we don't do that, but we do give you a tool to do it.
We'll give you some great questions today. What is the best source of screening laws, background screening laws, the employer should follow? And he adds to that, or should the background screening company manage that for the employer?
Yeah, and there's probably a lot of answers to that. And Danny Davila is our compliance director here, and I'd be happy if anybody wants to email me. I would get you in touch with him for probably a better and more thorough answer. But when it comes to background screening, FCRA, the Fair Credit Reporting Act, now we're not pulling, and for the most part, we're not pulling credit reports unless we're doing employment credit reports for certain positions. But we are a CRA, which is a consumer reporting agency. And as such, we fall under the FCRA rules for compliance. And so now it's important to remember also the FCRA was originally created for doing credit reports. And then as it kind of morphed into more, it also employment background checks also fell under that and fell under those guidelines. So that would be the first place I would say, is to read through and know the FCRA rules and regulations, which you can go to the FCRA government site, because you as an HR professional should be well aware of those rules and what they are, and not just count on your background screening company to know those for you.
Okay, we're going to go to one final question here, and this is a good one. What is the biggest mistake you personally have ever encountered when obtaining a background check?
Yeah, and I can tell you one is a mistake that I didn't even know that I was making, and that was working as a staffing company years ago, and we would take in lots of applications for employment, and to save time, but not money. We actually, it was one of the mistakes that we were spending a lot more money and giving it to our background screening company, but we would run a background check on every single application, or at least if we felt like if they interviewed well and we could probably place them in a position, we would run a background check on almost every candidate that we felt like was a good candidate. However, we didn't have an offer for a position for them or an assignment for them until later. And so our mistake was we were running background checks as a pre-employment screening process, because we felt like also if we saw a background criminal offense pop up on them, then of course we eliminated them as a candidate working for our staffing company. So that was probably unknowingly, knowing now what I know working for a background screening company, I know of course that was a mistake, but didn't know it at the time.
All right. Well, David, what a great presentation. I really appreciate you providing your expertise today. I really enjoyed it. I'd like to thank everyone in the audience for the great questions today.
Absolutely.
I wanted to let you know that we recorded this event, and I'm going to post it online tomorrow, and I will send a link to everyone who registered for the event. David, do you have any closing comments?
No, thank you very much, everyone. It was good to do this presentation. I think this will be our final presentation this year, but we'll be looking forward to more educational webinars like this next year.
Yeah, we're definitely going to do some next year, and thank you so much to everyone for participating. That was a little loud, wasn't it? Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye.